Good morning.
I'm Kieran Flanagan and this is my business partner, Dan Gregory. Now let's just be clear about something because people often ask, we're business partners, not life partners. Although after 20 years of working together, it's kind of like a marriage.
What Kieran's indicating is that she bosses me around, we complete each other's sentences and we don't have sex. Has anyone here been married for 20 years knows what I'm talking about? Yeah.
But before we get started, we just wanted to point out some of the differences between American idioms and Australian ones. You see, you guys were settled by religious Puritans.
Whereas we were settled by convicts. So there's every chance we will cross the line this morning, but we'll hopefully not go too far for you.
And the differences don't end there. We speak to American audiences a lot, and they can really lull you into a false sense of security.
Because we assume that you all speak English, when in fact you speak American, which sounds almost exactly like English, but is in fact a completely different language.
For instance, you guys say trash can.
We say rubbish bin.
You call this a hood.
We call this a bonnet.
Baby's crying, you use a pacifier.
We put a dummy in their mouth.
Baby needs changing, you put on a diaper.
We change their nappy.
You say cookie.
We say biscuit.
You say biscuit.
We say scone. It's confusing, right?
You say this is what a 46-year-old Australian man looks like.
Whereas we say this is what a 46-year-old Australian man looks like. So I think we're very close on this, aren't we? Yeah, I mean, whenever I look at Hugh Jackman, I feel like Arnold Schwarzenegger in that movie Twins. I know it's like I'm looking into a mirror. Come on!
You call these flip-flops.
Whereas we call these thongs. So you can imagine the trouble a young Australian gets into when he first moves to the United States and on a hot summer's day turns to his American colleagues and says, I can't wait to get home and slip my feet into some thongs. So there's every chance today we may fail to cross the cultural divide, we may say something that's confusing, or we may even say something offensive. Trust us, that is not our intention. But if we do fail to make that connection, I want you all to feel free to yell out in unison the word thongs, and Kieran and I will retrace our steps and try and correct our error.
Actually, I think we should do a little bit of a practice. So all together, we're going to shout out thongs if you hear something that you don't understand. So if I were to say, I like eating fairy floss, you would all shout out, thongs!
Excellent, because what we call fairy floss, you call cotton candy. So what we really want to talk to you about today is how do we amplify our influence? And what we're going to suggest to you today is that our capacity to drive influence is determined by our understanding of human behaviour. Because we're all collecting reams and reams of data, or as you American persons might say, data, but very few of us are converting it into understanding. Very few of us are using that data to create a sense of meaning. And the key to influence is understanding what's driving human behaviour, what's driving our customers, what's driving our staff, what's driving ourselves. So we're going to share 4 observations with you today about how we can increase our influence by understanding human behaviour. And the first thing we want to suggest is that we all need to lose the delusion and plan for failure. Because if we're all honest, we're all a little bit delusional. Let's just check with the room. Just have a look at the people sitting around you. Now, what we want you to do is put your hand up if you believe you are below average competence compared to the rest of the room. If you're below average, okay, we have 2 honest people in the middle of the room. Here's how statistics work. 50% of the room should have their hands in the air right now. So we're all a little bit delusional. Let's just share some frightening statistics with you. 50% of the global population was in the bottom half of the class. I always need to let that sit for a while because I'm never sure which half of the class is in the room. Now, obviously, I'm not saying this is geographically correct. I mean, what are the odds of the United States being in the top half and Australia being in the bottom? There we go, much better. Right? But let's forget about the fact that 50% of the population was in the bottom half of the class. 50% of the population is below average competence. Let's have a look at average, because this is what we think of as average. Here's the thing. The average man in the street is, in fact, pretty average. Now, I'm sure we've all seen the bell curve before, haven't we? It's the same everywhere in the world. Average usually sits between 60% and 70%, usually around 65. That's where we assume average to be. Here's what that means. This is what a bell curve really looks like before it's standardized. Before we standardize, we've got a few people up the top who are exceptional. We've got a whole pile of people around above average, a whole pile of average around 50%, some people who are below average, and then one person down on the end who is technically a potato. Now, let's assume the bell curve at 65%. What that means is the average person, your average customer, your average member of staff gets 1 in 3 decisions wrong. That's what 65% means. 1 in 3 decisions is made incorrectly. And that's assuming that all decisions are equally weighted. That did you pick the kids up from the pool is equal to, do you want fries with that? Gallup's Global Workforce Engagement Study found that 50% of our workforce is not engaged in the work that they're doing. Over 50%. 20% is actively disengaged. The majority of our staff ranges between I don't care about this job to I hate this job. One of the reasons we fail is we don't factor that kind of failure into our systems and our processes. We need to assume that average doesn't sit exactly where we think it does, and we actually need to plan for failure.
In fact, the principal reason we fail is that we don't plan for failure. Now, this is a guy named Richard de Crespigny. Now, for those of you in the room who don't recognize Richard, he's the pilot who famously landed the QF-32, an Airbus A380, with a giant, massive, gaping hole in the wing. Something you don't need to be an aeronautical expert to know is a pretty bad thing to have happen. And we were speaking at a conference in Thailand with Richard, and we got chatting about the incident. And surprisingly, he's really quick to give a lot of credit to the plane itself. Now, undoubtedly, Richard's a hero, but he's also a really modest guy. But he's also partly right. For over 50 years now, the aeronautical engineering industry has been designing planes that can stay up in the air with only 50% of their engines working. That means they can lose half of their thrust and still maintain enough altitude and speed to not fall out of the sky and to get where they're going and land safely. But how many of us think that way about our businesses? I mean, what would happen in your business tomorrow if 50% of your customers just disappeared? Or if half of your staff didn't show up? Or if 50% of your tech failed? Here's the thing. Failure is going to happen. Spoiler alert. It's going to happen. Often it's going to be epic, even with technology, sometimes because of technology. So we need to factor failure into our design. We need to expect it so failure doesn't have to be catastrophic. And one of the ways we can do this is by working with human nature, not fighting against it. You know, growing up in Australia, you learn 2 really important things about swimming in the ocean. The first is always try and swim near an English tourist. Because while you might not be able to outswim a shark, hey, you just might not have to. The second, we're tough in Australia. The second is if you get caught up in a riptide, to always swim with the current, to never try and swim against it. If you try and swim against it, you go nowhere. You get exhausted. And without rescue, you just might drown. We think it's exactly the same when it comes to working with human nature. We need to swim with the current of it, not try and fight it. Because if we try and fight it, we go nowhere, we get really tired, we get jaded, and we give up. And here's the thing. Human nature is not always as magnificent as we walk around pretending that it is. You know, we walk around pretending we're all motivated and inspired all of the time. That we're all amazingly selfless, unbelievably courageous, and blindingly intelligent. And most days, we're pretty average. In fact, there's no nice way to put this. Most days we're all selfish, scared, and stupid. Now I know what you're thinking. Geez, Kieran and Dan, tell us what you really think. Aren't you meant to be motivational speakers? Inspire us with possibility? But bear with us. Selfish, scared, and stupid is actually a really amazing thing to be. It's wonderful. It's one of the reasons, well, it is the reason that we're all here today. Because our forebears were selfish, scared, and stupid enough to stay alive long enough to pass on their genetic material. Being selfish meant that we looked out for number one. We looked out for ours and our own. Being scared meant we looked to mitigate risk. We were acutely aware of our failures and we looked to compensate for them. And being stupid meant that we looked for the easiest and simplest way to get something done. Why? Well, our survival brain still drives most of our decisions unconsciously. In fact, it drives most of our decisions so much that the American Journal of Applied Psychology did 3 separate experiments. And in every case, they found that a human being reversing out of a parking lot takes longer to reverse out of the spot if another person is waiting for the spot. It is not your imagination. Because what's happening is our survival brain is unconsciously kicking in and defending its territory. Do not leave the spot. It is your spot. Even though it goes against our primary goal of leaving the parking lot, getting home and watching The Voice.
Here's the thing that we've learned, is design beats discipline and motivation. Because no one is motivated all of the time. No one is disciplined in every part of their lives. Motivation and discipline are actually short-term strategies. If we want to drive lasting change, we need to think about design rather than discipline or motivation. Let me explain to you using a personal story about how this works. Every year, at the beginning of the year, Kieran and I get together and we share our business and personal goals. Now, Kieran and I fly virtually every day of the year. You know, today we're here in San Diego. Next week we'll be in Singapore and Hong Kong. Then we're in San Francisco the week after. We'll be in Europe the week after that. So we don't get to spend a lot of time. So at the beginning of 2014, my personal goal was to spend more time at home. And we got to the end of 2014 and we had a look at our goals. And what we realized was I hadn't achieved that goal at all. So Kieran and I sat down and we did the math. We did the numbers. And what we found was I've got an hour's drive to work every day and an hour's drive back home. That's 2 hours a day. Times 5 days, multiplied by 5 days, that's 10 hours a week. That's roughly 1 long work day every week, multiplied by 52 weeks, factor in weekends, that's 2 whole months every year that I'm not at home. Discipline won't solve that problem. Motivation can't solve that problem. It's actually a design failure. If all I did was move where I live half an hour closer to where I work, or move where we work half an hour closer to where I live, I instantly, with no more motivation, no more discipline, get an extra month at home every year. But we don't think about that in business so much. We don't design for solutions. We either beat our staff up and try and drive discipline, or we beat ourselves up and try and change our behaviour in order to get a result. And it makes a significant difference in the way that we design for productivity. You know, Julian just said earlier that every wall is in fact our brand. I want to suggest to you today that our brand is defined by our most recent customer touch point. That's what defines our brand. You know, we're working with one of the, well, it's actually the biggest phone company in Australia. And as you can, has anyone here had a bad customer experience with a phone company? It seems reasonably common. I mean, that's something I think we can agree on. Here's the thing. When you rang up the phone company and you had that bad experience, did you walk away thinking, wow, that was an awful experience? I hope the person I spoke to is okay. I hope they haven't got a sick child at home. I hope they haven't had an argument with their spouse. You don't walk away, you go, oh, I hate that company. The entire organisation, the entire brand is defined by the most recent customer touch point. That's also our opportunity. You know, Kieran and I recently had to buy some office furniture, so we went to IKEA. Now, usually I hate IKEA. I even hate the Swedish because of IKEA. You know, you go in looking to buy a bookcase, they bring out a couple of planks of wood, hand you a hex key and go, here, put that together yourself. So I like to rip up a $100 bill, hand it to them and go, here, put that together yourself. Here's some instructions in Chinese. But we walked into IKEA and it was pouring rain outside. We walked into the store and there was a small sandwich board handwritten in chalk. And what it said was, it's raining outside, so we've cut the price of our umbrellas in half. All of a sudden I liked IKEA. All of a sudden I felt more disposed to spend money in that store. So whenever Kieran and I see an amazing customer service example, we always track down the manager of the store to find out how they train their staff to make that happen. And we found the manager of this particular IKEA store and we said, so how did you locate that kind of stuff? How did you train them? What is it that you did that made them so thoughtful? And they said, no. It wasn't about how we trained our staff. Every IKEA store on the planet has one of those signs in a storeroom. We just teach our staff to wheel it out when it's raining. In other words, they do the thoughtfulness before the thoughtfulness is required. How do you design into your systems, into your interfaces, in the way your customers talk to your staff talk to your customers? How do you design for success with a bias towards success and a bias against failure? That's the opportunity we have, is to do the thoughtfulness before the thoughtfulness is required. Third thing we want to say is align your goals with their values. Because so often we spend all this time talking about our product or our service or our features and our benefits. We're spending so much time talking about ourselves that we're not engaging with our customers properly. Here's the thing. The truth is, the sale is never in the product. The sale is always in the prospect. Align your goals with their values. I'll give you an example. Kieran and I were recently working with 500 pharmaceutical salespeople at a huge international pharmaceutical company. And we said to this group of pharmaceutical salespeople, can anyone here tell us what doctors sell? Right?
Actually, why don't we ask the room?
Actually, yeah, just yell it out. What do you think doctors sell? Well-being. Drugs. Education, expertise. All the kind of answers they gave us. But here's the thing, doctors are professional services. Doctors sell time. If I go and see my Dr. Shane, he says, Dan, you're a diabetic with high blood pressure. He writes me a prescription, I walk out the front door, massive stroke, drop dead. I didn't get health. I didn't get well-being. Shane got paid. I didn't make it to the pharmacy to get my drugs. Shane got paid. Selfish son of a... Here's why that matters. Every single one of those pharmaceutical salespeople is on the phone every day. What's the one thing they ask doctors to give them for free? They ask for time. We infringe on our customers' values all of the time because we don't understand them well enough. Again, we're collecting data, but we're not turning it into understanding. We were working with some optometrists recently, clearly. And we said to them, can anyone here tell us what business you're in? And they also said, we're eye doctors, guys. We're all in medical services. And we said, oh, that's interesting. Where's the money? Where do you make the margin? Do you make the money in the back room with that machine going, blurry, less blurry, blurry, less... 5 years at college to do that. Blurry, less blurry. And they also know the consults cover the costs, but we actually make all of our real money selling frames. And we said, oh, that's interesting. So you're not in medical services, you're all in retail fashion. And they all looked at us like 5 years at college, and these guys tell us we work at the Gap. But we said to them, how have you decorated your store? Is your store decorated to look like a fashion boutique that's inviting and I want to go in, spend some time browsing, trying stuff on? Or is it decorated to look like a medical clinic that's intimidating and no one wants to go inside unless they have to? What does your website look like? How have you arranged the frames that I look at? Are they arranged by face shape so I know it's going to make me look good? Or by season so I know it's going to make me look fashionable? Or are they arranged generically by brand? And where do you spend your training budget? Do you spend your training budget on yourself so you can do the blurry, less blurry thing more efficiently? Or do you spend it on the 19-year-old who's sitting up front updating her Facebook status when she's your sales department, the source of all your profit? And they spend all their time, money and focus on the wrong things because they don't actually understand the business that they're really in. They know their product, they know their service, they know their job, they know their role. They don't understand the business that they're really in. And we see this in organizations all around the world. You know, one of the things I do when I'm not speaking to audiences or working with Kieran in our business is I sit as a director on the board of the White Ribbon Foundation, which is the campaign to end violence against women. And I got involved with White Ribbon for 2 reasons. The first reason was because of a poster I saw in a marketing textbook when I was a 19-year-old university student. Simple but confronting headline. It simply reads, 1 in 4 women will be raped in her lifetime. Will it be your mother, your sister, your daughter, or your wife? Now, when I saw that poster, it absolutely floored me. From that moment on, my little sister never had to worry about a ride home, no matter what time of night it was. My then girlfriend always found me outside her college classes at night to take her home, and I still walk my business partner Kieran to her car every night after work. Not because I'm a nice guy.
He's actually not.
Not because I'm a nice guy, but because they made women's safety a man's issue. They made women's safety my issue. They aligned their goals with my values. That was the first reason I got involved. The second reason I got involved is this little girl, my goddaughter.
I think you'll find she's my daughter.
It's not about you, Kieran, it's my story. This is my goddaughter, Darcy, and she's amazing. She's so clever. She's such a smart little girl. I mean, I'd love her if she was stupid, but I'll be honest, I'd love her less. Is that wrong? Kieran and I were recently in Kuala Lumpur in Malaysia, and we were working with a client over there, and Kieran and her husband decided to go out and do some shopping. So Darcy and I had breakfast together in the hotel. And she's sitting across the table from me, and she says, Dan, I am 4 years of age, but very soon I will be 5, then 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10, and it will go past very quickly. And I said, well, I hope it doesn't go past too quickly, Darcy. And she said, why? And I said, well, what if you grow up so much that you don't need your godfather anymore? And she reached her little hand across the table, put it on mine, and said, Dan, we will always need each other. I picked up the phone and I called her mum. I said, dude, you need a bigger place because someone's getting a pony. I'm involved with White Ribbon for selfish reasons. It's about the world I want her to inherit. You know, they've aligned their goals with my values. And that's what we can all do as brands, is align our goals with values.
And you know, it doesn't matter what we're creating, whether it's a TV ad, a print ad, an app, a website, an experience face-to-face. If we can do that, then we can really engage our customers. You know, we found this little small space ad in our local newspaper, and it's got an image of a single rose, a medium bunch of roses, and a really large bunch of roses with a simple thought: just how sorry are you? They clearly know what it is they're selling to their customers. And you know, Disney's had an enormous resurgence recently, and it's due in no small part to the fact they now make movies for dual audiences, because they worked out what their customers were really buying and what they wanted. So they now tell stories with something in it for kids, but really importantly, something in it for adults, because they know who's buying the DVDs and having to watch them over and over and over again. I can see all the parents in the room nodding.
Let it go, Kieran. Let it go, let it go, let it go.
I mean, I don't know if you guys have seen Toy Story, but if you have, you might remember that in Toy Story, there's a scene where Bo Peep says to the main character, Woody, in a really sort of sexy, breathy, Marilyn Monroe-esque voice, and she leans in and she says, well, what do you say I get someone else to watch this sheep tonight? So just maybe Woody's about to earn his name. And when companies like Betty Crocker invented the cake mix back in the 1950s, what most people don't realize is that they were initially an incredible failure. And they failed because they were too easy. I know, women are complicated creatures. But to the 1950s housewife, it didn't feel like real cooking. So they reformulated the mix. They changed one thing. They changed it so women got to crack an egg into the mix and feel part of the process. And now people use cake mix nearly every day. And why that was important is what they realized is they weren't selling cakes. They were selling care. Making a cake is an act of care, and that was the critical ingredient. It's really important that we align our goals with their values. We were working with the United Nations in Singapore recently, helping them to develop strategies to fight human trafficking in the region. And we did a whole lot of things, but one of the most important and simple things we did was to change the language that they used to talk about the issue to make it more meaningful for the people we were trying to get to help change things. Think about it. Human trafficking sounds less confronting than slavery, doesn't it? Yeah, right? It's softer. It's less personal. It doesn't hurt here as much. I mean, it almost sounds like a nice thing to do. And Singapore's sex industry kind of sounds legitimate, right? After all, it's an industry. It sounds like something that would be good for the economy. You almost expect them to pay tax. It certainly sounds less criminal than when we call it organised kidnapping and rape, which is what it actually is. So we changed the messaging they used to talk about the issue to make it meaningful, to make it significant. But, we do the same thing in the corporate world all the time. We use less human language and we make it difficult for people to connect to what we're saying. I mean, we call our staff capital, which literally means head of cattle, moo. Or user experience becomes UX, even though it goes against the whole point of having a user experience. And then there's the massive amounts of jargon that we all use every single day. The kind of stuff that sounds like it should be delivered by a 1950s smiling air hostess. Smiling. We need to optimize our collateral to facilitate the corporate journey and streamline our onboarding process so all employees can live the corporate values, walk the corporate path, and embody the company ethos. That way we'll have the bandwidth to leverage our supplier pipeline, creating enough synergy so that going forward we can ideate some blue sky thinking and incentivize our brand evangelists with a holistic approach and a bespoke solution, all by COP. That's close of play. Because remember, we're all having such fun, aren't we?
Last point. Create stories that are worth sharing. According to Nielsen research, 91% of us rely on friend recommendations before making a purchase. 91%. Don't just ask for, don't just consider, we rely on friend recommendations. And we often talk about the importance of storytelling. I think we need to shift from this idea of storytelling to story doing. In other words, what are we implementing in our behaviours, in our interfaces, in the connectivity that we have with our customers that's worth telling a story about? Because we don't share stories about good service. We only share stories about the exceptional, the surprising, the unexpected. That's what drives stories. I introduced you to Darcy, my goddaughter, a little while ago. When Kieran asked me to be Darcy's godfather, I bought her a charm bracelet. And every year, on her birthday, I buy her a charm based on what we've done together that year. It's kind of a living memory of our lives together. This year, when she turned 7, I took her to Tiffany to select her charm for her bracelet. What was interesting was the woman at the Tiffany counter didn't treat her like a 7-year-old looking for a charm. She treated her like a 27-year-old looking for an engagement ring. It was an amazing experience. She invited Darcy up to the service desk. She unrolled that pale blue velvet, lifted the box out from under the counter, took the lid off very carefully, got a pair of tweezers and lifted the charm out of the box and put it down on the velvet for Darcy to examine. Do you think that little girl is ever going to accept jewellery from anywhere other than Tiffany? It was an extraordinary experience, but it was an experience worth telling a story about.
They can also be unbelievably bad stories that we share. And I'm going to tell you 2 quick stories to illustrate the difference. This is a young girl named Phoebe Cleven. Now, Phoebe was just 10 years old when she took her first plane trip alone, and she was heading for her summer camp in Grand Rapids from San Francisco. Then she has to make a stopover and change planes in Chicago. But don't worry, her mum and dad pay United Airlines a special fee to have a chaperone meet Phoebe and see her safely to her connecting flight. So at San Francisco airport, Phoebe's parents kiss her goodbye, tell her to have a wonderful time, and stay and make sure the plane takes off safely. Hours later, they receive a call from summer camp. Phoebe hasn't arrived. Her mum immediately calls United, tells them what's happened, only to be put on hold for 40 minutes. Now keep in mind, these are no ordinary minutes. These are parents in a panic minutes. Those are like dog years. Yeah, much longer than normal minutes. Every parent knows that time is relative when it comes to kids. And a child on their own, in their room, not making any noise for 3 minutes is the equivalent of having Aerosmith in a hotel room for a month. Eventually, she gets through to United Airlines and she speaks to a woman who tells her, "We can confirm that the chaperone failed to arrive and as a result, Phoebe did not make her flight. We have no idea where she actually is, but don't worry, she's probably fine." Now, is probably the word you'd use to the panic parent of a 10-year-old that your company had lost? Probably not, right? Time to escalate things. Luckily, Dad's a premier United frequent flyer, so he calls a special line for their most important guests, and he gets put on hold for 15 minutes. Okay, so Aerosmith have decided to extend their stay. Eventually, he gets through to Chicago Airport, and he speaks to a woman from United, and he begs her, "Please, can you go to the gate and see if my little girl is okay?" And she says, "I can't help you. My shift is about to end." Seriously, I wish I was making that up. The good news is they do find Phoebe and she does eventually make it to summer camp safe and sound. But United show no empathy. They offer no apology. Contrast that with the story of Panera Bread. And now, 21-year-old student Brandon Cook goes to visit his grandmother in hospital. She's dying of cancer, and they both know there's not much time left. And she tells him she'd like one last bowl of Panera's famous clam chowder. So Brandon calls them, only to find out they make the chowder on Friday, and it's Tuesday. But Suzanne from Panera is so moved by Brandon's story that she says, "Don't worry. We'll make up a special batch of the chowder especially for your grandma and to pop by later that day." When Brandon goes to collect it, it's all wrapped up with a box of cookies. This, as it turns out, is the last meal his grandmother ever has. Now, I am not saying it killed her. It just happened to turn out that way. Now, Brandon blogs and Facebooks and does all that about his experience, and social networks and the media pick up the story. And they call Suzanne from Panera to ask her why she did it. And she says, "Anyone at Panera would have done exactly the same thing. I just happened to be the one who answered the phone that day." Wow, right? What a story worth sharing.
One quick story to finish with on the pass-onability of stories, on the portability of stories, on the infectivity of stories. We launched Nando's into Australia almost 20 years ago now. Now, Nando's is a fast food chain that sells Portuguese-style chicken. And at the time, they had 2 restaurants in Australia, one in Melbourne and one in Sydney. And they came to us and they were incredibly ambitious. They said, "Guys..."
That's a really long way apart, just so you know.
So that's San Diego to San Francisco kind of distance. So they came to us and they said, "Guys, we want to be famous." And we said, "Excellent. How much money have you got?" And they said, $5,000. And I'll be honest, we said less excellent. But we were young and naive and we thought we'd have a go. Now, because they didn't have a lot of money, we knew that we'd either need to create a story that people could share on our behalf, or that, leverage off a story that people were already telling in the marketplace. Now, I don't know how much you know about Australian politics, but at that time in Australia, we had a particular politician called Pauline Hanson, and she was incredibly racist. She was anti-immigration, she was anti-foreigner, and we decided that was something that we as a brand could stand against. So we made one poster with that $5,000. We ran it only in one place, across the road from Pauline's electoral office in Ipswich, Queensland, which from San Diego and San Francisco is like running the ad in Seattle. We had a picture of a brown chicken, a white chicken, and a black chicken with the headline, "We're all the same on the inside, Pauline." This one $5,000 poster made national television news, was the front page of newspapers all around the country, and the subject of talkback radio and social media for a week. Nando's, of course, were thrilled. They were famous overnight. They said, "Wow, if you can do that with $5,000, you reckon we can do a television ad with $10,000? And again, young and naive, we thought we'd have a go. Now, that $10,000 actually included the media spend. So the only place we could afford to run the ad was after midnight. So we made an ad that was deliberately designed to look cheap and appropriate to the time slot. And this is the ad that we ended up making.
Why not spoil yourself tonight? We're very eager to please. Prefer something a little exotic? Insatiable? Have both of us. For the hottest chickens, call Nando's.
Okay, so a little bit of background on this ad. When we went to shoot this film, we had to find some chicken-sized lingerie. No easy task. So Kieran and I went to Sydney's most famous sex shop, the Tool Shed, to see what we could find. Now, just to set the scene, at the time, Kieran was a cute, blonde, bubbly 21-year-old.
What are you saying, Dan?
You haven't changed a bit. But Kieran has a voice that's a mixture of innocence and enthusiasm. So Kieran bounds up to the cashier at the tool shed and says, "We'd like to buy a leather harness, please." The guy behind the counter looks at me as if to say, "Well done you, mate." Then Kieran adds, "But it's got to be small enough to fit on a chicken." At this point, every weirdo in the tool shed looks at Kieran and I like we've taken things to a level they never imagined possible. Kieran, of course, realises what she says, "No, it's not a live chicken, it's a dead one." The point is, we created stories that people could share on our behalf. You know, Julian talked about the fact that it's not about the media we use, it's not the medium that we transmit through, it's actually about our capacity to build messaging that connects with people. And that's the thing that we'd like to leave you with. What are the stories that you create? Or rather, what is the story doing that you're involved in? Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.